They said the front row was for family, and that was how I learned my money could buy chandeliers, champagne, and silk ribbons, but not respect. I stood there in my navy suit, the one I wore at my retirement ceremony, and watched the usher's eyes skim the list like he was reading my future. He hesitated, then smiled with that fixed politeness that makes the word sir feel like a fence. "Mr. Turner," he said, "you will be seated in the back." He pointed toward the last row, where late arrivals and distant acquaintances melt into wallpaper. I knew the seat had been waiting for me long before I arrived. I walked down the aisle backward from my life, past faces that turned and then carefully turned away again, and when I sat, the cushion was colder than anything I remembered from winter barracks. At the front, my ex-wife gleamed beneath good lighting, her new husband's hand set on hers, as if he owned the patent to belonging. The violin trembled through the speakers, the room glowed. My daughter took her first step, white dress whispering like a secret I was not meant to hear. What kind of father claps for his own disappearance? I tried to swallow the bitterness and remind myself why I had come. I had come because a promise is a promise, and because I paid for the dream she had once described to me in a voice that belonged to a little girl with a cardboard medal. I had come because $38,000 had left my account in quiet, obedient lines, each transfer a prayer, each receipt a reassurance that good fathers still existed. I had come because a soldier keeps his word even when the word's cut. I told him I could, though all I saw were silhouettes of people who had names for one another that did not include mine. When the photographer called for family only, I stood instinctively, my body still believing in a past tense that wanted to be present. The coordinator slid in front of me with a gentle palm and a smile that apologized for nothing. "We have enough, sir." "Sir," the title that used to open doors, now a hand on my chest. I sat back down and felt my heart fold itself smaller to fit the chair. Is this what betrayal looks like now, polite, perfumed, and dressed in ivory? Dinner arrived like a performance with numbered cues. Toast, laughter, clinking glass, a rehearsed intimacy bright as confetti, and I watched from the good seats in the farthest bad place. The groom's father stood and thanked everyone who made this possible, a sentence that knows how to avoid names. I carried my glass toward the head table, thinking I would offer a simple wish, and the planner, flawless, from binder to smile, intercepted the play. "Mr. Turner," the couple asked the parents to remain in their sections for the photographs. It keeps things classy. The word tasteful would have been saltier. I nodded because dignity sometimes looks like an exit. On my way back, a server barely old enough to rent a car placed a plate before me and whispered, "Thank you for your service." And I did not know whether he meant the uniform or the invoice. I lifted the glass, swallowed bubbles that stung like unspoken apologies, and set it down before my hand showed its tremor. How far is a man from the head table when the distance is measured in pride? The band softened, and light fell warmer across the dance floor, and my mind slipped free of the present, like a photograph peeling from old glue. She was 10 again, hair ribboned by her own stubborn hands, holding up a medal cut from cardboard and threaded with string. It said, "With glitter glue honesty, best dad in the world." I keep that medal tucked behind my veteran identification because certain truths deserve hiding places that last. That night she told me, very seriously, that when she married, she wanted me to walk her down the aisle. And I said I would, the same way a man says he will breathe again tomorrow. Promises are small anchors for the days that try to drift. Back in the hall, the present sharpened like a blade. I felt for the medal in my wallet, and when I pulled my fingers away, they sparkled faintly. Glitter is a stubborn thing. Love, too. Then a voice behind the curtain of conversation, soft and surgical. "They had to seat him back there. You know how people talk." I set my fork down too fast. The ping on the plate rang out like a tiny alarm. So it was never a mistake. It was a decision with a smile. I stepped into the garden because the night does not lie the way people do. The air smelled of cut grass and the ghost of summer rain, and I lit a cigarette I had promised my doctor I would never touch again. The match flared, a brief sunrise in my palm, and I felt the calm I used to feel before stepping into places where calm is not promised. I thought about the men I had carried and the faces I still remember when the house is too quiet. I thought about the times I had chosen someone else's safety over my own comfort and how that habit had followed me home. Smoke rose, thin as regret, and the stars looked like nails hammered into a dark board to hold the world in place. Maybe dignity is not something you receive. Maybe it is something you hold while everyone else pretends not to notice. I flicked ash into gravel. The music inside swelled and then receded. I considered leaving without a scene, the kind of exit a good father makes to avoid ruining the video. Then the side door opened, spilling light like a confession, and a staffer hurried toward me. "Mr. Turner," she said, breathless, "the host is asking for you. They want you on the stage." I could not tell if the shape inside her voice was apology or urgency. Is this another polished cruelty, or the first true thing I will be offered tonight? I followed her back in, the soles of my shoes speaking softly to the floor. Each step an argument I could not afford to lose. The hall turned toward me like a field of sunflowers chasing the morning, and the master of ceremonies lifted a microphone that suddenly looked heavier than it should have. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, stretching the room into a single listening ear, "please stand for the man who made this day possible." The applause began as a ripple and arrived as a wave. Hands slapping together, faces turned bright, phones lifted to make proof for later. I stood where the light could find me and tried not to flinch. Pride did not come. Something colder did. Something like the truth when it is dressed as flattery. My daughter's eyes were glassy, a surface that might be water or ice depending on what you step with. The groom's hand tightened around hers, and for a heartbeat I watched their fingers become a lock. I smiled for her because a soldier learns to smile in the rain so the squad will keep moving. I smiled because she was still my little girl, even if she had moved my chair to the place where strangers sit. I did not bow. I did not speak. I let the applause drain from the room like bathwater, and I listened to the silence left behind. Why does approval sound so loud when love has gone quiet? They offered me the microphone. I did not take it. I asked for a glass of water instead, because I wanted to say only what water says when you listen. Patience, clarity, life. The host tried again, a gentle insistence disguised as honor, but I shook my head and pressed my palm to my chest, as if to say, "Not tonight." A murmur touched the walls and crawled back down. Someone, somewhere, disappointed that I refused to perform gratitude for the camera. Across the room, my ex-wife looked at me with the expression you reserve for someone whose choices you intend to discuss later. I sipped the water and tasted metal. The server in black returned my nod with a nod of his own. He understood the language of refusal. The planner's smile remained flawless and terrible. The lights warmed a shade as if to soften a scene that could not be softened. I had the strangest thought that if I stood still long enough, the room might move around me like a carousel until I ended up back in the row where I began. If I speak, I will burn. If I do not, I will freeze. So which weather saves the heart? When the applause vanished completely, a thin hush revealed the real architecture of the night. Without sound to fill the gaps, the distances became visible. 10 feet between my shoes and the head table, 20 years between my promises and hers, the immeasurable space between what money paid for and what honor costs. I watched my daughter's chin tremble and stop. She is good at swallowing storms. The bandleader signaled the musicians with a small circle of his finger, and the music slid back under the room like a rug hiding a stain. The master of ceremonies moved on. "Let us continue," he said, as if he were a surgeon, stitching the evening closed. People sat, grateful for the return of instructions. A woman in a blue dress dabbed at tears that were not mine. I remained where I was for another breath. Then another. The metal in my wallet pressed against the seat of my heart, as if to remind me of the shape it prefers. I set the glass down and found that my hand was steady again. Dignity is not a chair they offer. It is the way you stand when they point to the last row. I might have returned to my table and let the night finish its choreography, but something shifted, something quiet and decisive that did not belong to applause or etiquette. The groom's father rose again with his glass and said my name at last, not to own me, but to announce me, and the room listened in a new way. He spoke about responsibility and sacrifice, and the unglamorous work of making a day like this possible, and I felt the edge of cynicism lift from my ribs. He was not generous because the camera watched. He was generous because his son had been watching him for years, and fathers know how to teach even when they are not trying. My daughter's eyes softened. I saw her at 10 again, the ribbon, the medal, the certainty that the world would remember who carried her. I did not take the microphone when they offered it a second time. I wanted her to hear a different lesson, that silence can be louder than gratitude when it protects the right thing. I nodded to the groom's father, a private salute from one man to another. He understood. The music returned again, and this time it sounded less like performance and more like permission to breathe. But the night still had one more truth hidden in its pocket, and it would not wait politely to reveal itself. I stepped off the stage, and the planner intercepted me. Apology fresh as a new flower on her tongue. "There was a misunderstanding about the seating," she said, eyes careful, voice rehearsed, and then she lost the line and told the truth by accident. They were worried. People might talk. I thanked her for her honesty because an honest wound heals cleaner than a beautiful lie. As I walked past the head table, my daughter stood, the chair scraping lightly, and for a second she looked as young as she once was, as if regret was a fountain that could turn time backward. I touched her shoulder, not for the camera, but for the girl who used to fall asleep in my lap on Sunday evenings when the world smelled like laundry and crayons. "Enjoy your night," I said, and she nodded too fast, and I saw the flash of pain that accompanies the moment a child recognizes the cost of her choices. I kept walking toward the garden because the night was the only witness I trusted. The door closed behind me, soft as a promise sliding back into its envelope. I stood beneath the patient, dark hands at my sides, listening for the sound of my own name. Somewhere inside, a host shuffled note cards, a band tuned, a bride laughed because her heart was trying not to break. I looked up at the sky and let the quiet do its work. I did not yet know that, before midnight, the real reason for my exile would step into the light and ask me for mercy. It happened just after midnight, when the last song was fading and most of the guests had already gone home. The hall was half empty, the air thick with the scent of roses dying in their vases. I was still standing in the garden, coat over my shoulder, cigarette burned to the filter. The silence after music feels different. It's not peace, it's aftermath. That's when I saw her through the glass door, walking toward me barefoot, her white heels dangling from her hand like two confessions she didn't know where to hide. My daughter. She stepped outside without looking up, shoulders trembling from a storm that had nothing to do with weather. The moonlight made her makeup seem heavier, like guilt trying to wear beauty as disguise. She said, "My name, not Dad, not Father, just Michael." That was when I knew this was not an apology. It was something colder, something that would make forgiveness look small. "I did not want to hurt you," she said. The first lie is always soft. "They said, it might look unbalanced, having you at the front with Mom and—" She could not finish. She did not have to. I knew the line that came after. "It might make people uncomfortable." That word, people, has ruined more families than war. It is the shield cowards hide behind when they can't admit their shame. I told her I understood. My voice was steady, my chest wasn't. I wanted to reach out, but my hand stayed at my side. I'd learned long ago that touching something broken doesn't fix it. It just cuts you, too. "I know," I said quietly. "You did what you thought was best for them." She nodded, eyes wet but unfallen. It's strange how pride keeps tears standing, like soldiers on the edge of surrender. Then she said something that changed everything. "Dad, it was Mom's idea." There it was, the hidden landmine I had been walking around all night. She told me you wouldn't mind, that you'd understand, because you always do. Always. The word snapped inside me like a trigger. I turned away before she saw my face twist. Understanding is what people ask for when they want your silence, not your heart. I walked back toward the hall. The band was packing up, their laughter echoing through the emptiness. My ex-wife stood near the stage, drink in hand, smiling at something her husband said. When she saw me, the smile fell just enough for the truth to slip through. She excused herself and approached with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed this confrontation in her mind for years. "Michael," she said, soft but sharp, "you didn't have to make that little scene earlier. I wanted to ask which scene my existence, or my breathing, but I kept still. It was about keeping things peaceful. You know how judgmental small towns can be." She took a sip of wine, pretending not to see the tremor in her own hand. I said nothing. And silence, once again, did the work words couldn't. Then she leaned in, her perfume sweet and wrong. "You should be grateful you were invited at all." That sentence landed like a bullet I had seen coming but couldn't dodge. Grateful. The word burned worse than anger. Gratitude, to her, was a leash, something to remind me that generosity must kneel. I looked her in the eye, calm and cold, and said, "I didn't come to be seen. I came to see." She frowned, confused. I let it hang there. Some truths are meant to sting slowly. I left the hall then, without saying goodbye to anyone. The night had gone quiet again. My car sat under the lamplight, lonely and loyal. I started the engine, and the radio came alive with a preacher's voice from some late-night AM station. He was saying, "Forgiveness is freedom, but truth is the road that gets you there." I almost laughed. Freedom was the last thing I felt, but truth, I was about to find plenty of that. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me answered. A man's voice came through, low and nervous. "Mr. Turner, this is Kyle." The the wedding photographer. I didn't know him, but he sounded like someone holding a secret too heavy to keep. Sir, he continued, I think you should know. There was a conversation before the ceremony, between your ex-wife and the planner. It was recorded. My assistant caught it on the prep camera by accident. My hands tightened on the wheel. He hesitated. They were talking about seating you in the back, not because of space, but because she said it would look better for her husband's family image. I just thought you should know. The car slowed itself, my foot numb on the brake. I pulled to the shoulder and let the headlights illuminate the quiet trees. For a long time, I said nothing. The truth had weight, but it also had light, and once light arrives, darkness starts to lose its power. Thank you, I said simply. He offered to send the clip. I told him not yet. I wasn't ready to see it, not until I could decide what kind of man I wanted to be after hearing it. When I got home, the house greeted me the way old soldiers greet each other, with silence that understands. I poured a glass of water, not whiskey, and sat at the kitchen table where the morning newspaper still waited from yesterday. There was a line on the front page about a local soldier's funeral, 23 years old, gone before his father could say goodbye. I thought of that father, and suddenly my pain felt both smaller and heavier. Smaller, because at least my daughter still lived. Heavier, because she had chosen to bury me while I was still breathing. At 2 a.m, I opened the window. The wind smelled like rain and dust. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. I whispered into the dark. Money built their wedding, but it won't buy my silence. And just as I said it, lightning flashed across the horizon, not near, but enough to remind me storms begin far away before they arrive at your door. Tomorrow, I would call the photographer back. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to confront them or to let the truth reveal itself on its own. But tonight, I needed to sit with the weight of what love costs when it is measured in shame. And as I turned off the light, I saw something glimmer on my wallet from the street lamp's reflection, the faint line of glitter from a cardboard medal, still refusing to fade. Even forgotten love leaves a mark that glows when everything else goes dark. But the story wasn't finished, because before dawn, my phone would ring again, and this time, the voice on the other end wouldn't be a stranger. The call came at 4:30 in the morning, the kind of hour that doesn't belong to night or morning, just to people who can't sleep. My phone buzzed across the wooden table, cutting through the silence like a blade. The name flashing on the screen wasn't a stranger this time. It was my daughter's husband, Evan. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. I didn't want his voice inside my house. But curiosity and pain make strange allies. I answered. Mr. Turner, he said quietly, his tone wrapped in guilt. I'm sorry to call this late. My chest tightened. The last time a man started a sentence with those words to me, it was from the military hospital, telling me who didn't make it back. What happened? I asked. He took a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since the wedding. It's about the video. For a moment, the world stopped. What video? The photographer's clip. Your daughter saw it. She didn't know your ex-wife said those things. She found out last night after you left. She's devastated. I closed my eyes, the darkness behind them trembling. The truth had finally done what I couldn't. It spoke without permission. She wanted me to call you, he said, but she couldn't stop crying. I could hear her in the background, soft, breaking sounds, like fabric tearing. It's strange how even grown daughters cry like children when guilt comes home. I told him I would come by in the morning. He said she wanted that. But after the call ended, I just sat there in my kitchen, staring at the glass of water I'd left unfinished, watching it catch the faint glow of dawn like a slow forgiveness I hadn't agreed to yet. When the sun rose, I drove back into town. The roads were empty, quiet like they were keeping secrets. Their house was too big for 2 people, that young white siding, perfect lawn, American success, and 4 bedrooms and 2 garages. I parked outside, and Evan opened the door before I could knock. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red. The television was on mute. The frozen image of her wedding still paused on the screen. I sat down across from her. Not too close, not too far. Dad, she whispered. The word sounded foreign on her tongue, like a language she hadn't practiced in years. I didn't know. I nodded. I believe you. I wanted to move you to the front when I found out, she said, tears trembling again. But Mom said it would ruin the program. She said it would embarrass her. I could have told her that her mother had embarrassed herself long before the ceremony. But I didn't. There are wounds you don't reopen just to prove they exist. Instead, I asked her, do you understand now why I stayed quiet? She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I thought you were angry. I was, I said, but not at you. I was angry that love can cost so much and still be cheapened by pride. She cried then, and I let her. I didn't move, didn't console her, because sometimes letting someone sit inside their guilt is the only honest way to love them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller. Mom called me after you left. She said you would forgive her. That you always do. I laughed once, soft, bitter. She's right. I probably will. But not because she deserves it. She looked up, confused. Then why? Because forgiveness isn't about what they deserve, it's about what you refuse to carry anymore. She wiped her eyes and reached for my hand. It was the first time in years she'd done that. Her fingers were cold. I could feel the pulse of a child who had once trusted me with her whole heart. I didn't pull away. For a long time, we said nothing. The paused image on the screen showed her smiling beside her mother, both frozen in borrowed happiness. I reached for the remote and pressed play. The video resumed, and we watched it together, every frame, every gesture. Then the moment came. The whisper caught on the planner's camera. My ex-wife's voice clear as daylight. "Seat him in the back. It will look better for the pictures." My daughter's shoulders shook. I didn't look at her, I just stared at the screen. The sound of those words didn't surprise me. They confirmed what I had already known deep in my bones. When it ended, she turned off the TV. "Do you hate her?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "Hate's a kind of attention. She's had enough of that from me." We sat in silence again. The morning light crept across the floor, touching her wedding dress, still hanging by the window. It looked different now, less holy, more human. She whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said gently. "You live with it until you grow past it." I left her house around 9. Evan shook my hand at the door, the way men do when words aren't enough. I could tell he wanted to apologize too, but I didn't need another apology. I needed distance. Driving home, I passed the old diner where my ex-wife and I used to eat on Sundays. The sign out front still flickered, half-dead neon letters spelling "Open." It felt ironic. Some doors stay open long after the people inside have left. When I got home, the answering machine light blinked. A message. Her voice. "Michael, it's me. I heard what happened with the video. You can be angry, but I did what I thought was right. You're too sentimental. You always were. Don't make this ugly for her." She hung up before the machine could beep. I stood there, listening to the silence that followed, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It just sounded empty. I went to my study, opened the drawer where I kept old letters, medals, and things that still smelled like time. I found the cardboard medal again, the one that said "Best Dad in the World." It was bent now, edges dulled, glitter fading, but when I held it to the light, a few sparkles still caught. That's when I realized dignity doesn't vanish when people try to bury it. It only waits for the right light to find it again. I set the medal on my desk beside a framed photo of her as a child and whispered to no one, "You don't have to invite me to the front row. I built the floor you're walking on." Outside, the wind shifted. A storm was moving in. And somewhere deep inside that wind, I heard a promise forming something I hadn't felt in years. Because this wasn't the end. The truth had only just begun to speak, and by the next Sunday, it would roar loud enough to bring the whole family back into the same room whether they wanted it or not. 3 days passed before the storm came. It started with a faint hum, the kind of wind that sounds like a warning you almost ignore. The forecast said light rain. But by evening, thunder was rolling across the valley, thick and deliberate, like someone knocking on a locked door. I stood by the window, watching the trees bend. Every few seconds, lightning cracked across the sky and turned the world into a photograph, frozen, colorless, honest. Storms always remind me of war. The build-up, the noise, the silence that follows. They strip everything of pretense. That night, I wasn't thinking about the weather. I was thinking about the letter that arrived that morning, handwritten, my ex-wife's name on the envelope. I hadn't opened it yet. It sat on the table beside my coffee mug, daring me. I didn't need to read it to know what it contained, justification disguised as grace. But storms are truth-hungry things. They force you to face what's already rumbling inside. So I tore the envelope open. Her handwriting hadn't changed, sharp, graceful, too practiced, to be honest. The first line read, "Michael, you need to stop making everyone feel guilty. You're turning what should have been a happy day into a pity play." I almost smiled. That was her way, turning apology into accusation, rewriting history while the ink was still wet. She wrote about appearances, about society, about how it looked to have me seated near her and her husband. She said people talk, that image matters. that she didn't want to humiliate me by placing me next to a new family dynamic. Humiliate me. The irony nearly made me laugh. But then came the final paragraph, and that one I read twice. For what it's worth, I hope you can forgive me. I know you loved me once, and maybe you still do in some quiet way, but you and I have always believed in different kinds of dignity. Yours comes from silence. Mine comes from survival. That last sentence hit differently. I folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and set it beside the medal on my desk. 2 relics of love, one handmade by innocence, one written by pride. The thunder outside cracked louder. Power flickered. I could hear rain beginning to strike the roof like 1,000 small verdicts. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the storm finish what she started. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time, it was not my daughter, it was my ex-wife's husband. His voice was low, embarrassed. "Michael," he said, "I thought you should know. She left this morning, packed a bag, said she needed to clear her head. I didn't ask where. I already knew the pattern. She ran from noise she created until she could rewrite it into someone else's fault." But then he said something that made me pause. "Before she left, she mentioned you, said she thinks you'll hate her forever." I told him the truth. Hate takes energy. I'm tired. He exhaled, maybe in relief, maybe in shame. "She'll come back when she's ready," he said. "She always does," I replied, and ended the call. Afterward, I made coffee and sat by the window. The storm had left the yard soaked, branches scattered across the road, but the air smelled clean. The kind of clean that comes only after something violent. I thought about what she'd written about silence and survival, and realized she wasn't entirely wrong. We did believe in different kinds of dignity. Hers depended on what people saw. Mine depended on what I could live with when no one was watching. And somewhere between those two definitions, our marriage had drowned. At noon, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, I saw my daughter standing there, hair still damp from the rain. She didn't speak. She just held out a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I found this in Mom's car," she said. Inside was an old photo, our family, back when things still looked easy. Me in uniform, her in a sundress, our daughter between us, holding that same cardboard medal. The edges were curled, but the smiles were real. Tucked behind the photo was a note in my ex-wife's handwriting. "Keep this. Maybe someday we'll all remember who we were before pride became a language." For a moment, none of us said anything. The rain outside softened into mist. My daughter looked at me as if waiting for instruction, but I had none to give. I just placed the box on the table beside the letter and the medal. 3 versions of the same truth. She asked quietly, "What are you going to do with it?" "Nothing," I said. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be remembered." She nodded, eyes lowering. "Mom's scared you won't talk to her again." "I might," I said, "but not yet. Sometimes silence has to finish its work before words can mean anything again." That night, the power finally returned. I made dinner simple, quiet food. The television murmured in the background, talking about traffic and politics, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about how storms clear the sky so the stars can show again. I looked at the medal one last time before bed. The glitter had dulled a bit more, but under the right light, it still caught a spark. That was enough. Then, just as I turned off the lamp, my phone buzzed again. One new message. From her. "I'm coming back tomorrow. There are things we need to talk about, things you don't know." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. The rain had stopped, but inside me, something else was beginning to move, a quiet, dangerous calm. Because if she was finally ready to tell the truth, I was finally ready to hear it. And some truths, once spoken, changed the shape of every silence that came before them. She came back on a Thursday afternoon. No warning, no call. Just the sound of tires grinding gravel and the sight of her red coat through my kitchen window. I hadn't seen that coat in years. It used to hang beside mine, back when we still shared the same weather. I opened the door before she could knock. We stood there, 2 people who knew too much about each other to pretend surprise. She spoke first. "I didn't come to fight." I nodded. "Good. I'm done with fighting." She stepped inside like a guest in her own memory. The silence between us was thick, but not cruel. I made coffee, and she watched me, her hands folded like she was holding something fragile. "You look older," she said. I smiled faintly. That's what peace does to a man. It ages slower than war, but it still leaves marks. She looked away, eyes flicking toward the medal on the table. "You kept it," she whispered. "I keep everything that tells the truth," I said. She took a slow breath. "Then maybe it's time you heard mine." We sat across from each other, the letter she'd written still lying between us, like a boundary. Her voice was calm, too calm. When I said it was about image, that wasn't the whole truth, she began. It was about fear. Not of what people thought, but of what I felt. I frowned. She hesitated. After you left, after the divorce, I told myself I moved on, but I didn't. I was still angry that you chose duty over me, over us. The military got the best of you. I got what was left. She looked up, and when I saw you at the wedding, standing there like you always did, strong, unbothered, it made me feel small again. Her confession cut sharper than her cruelty ever did. She continued before I could speak. Seating you in the back wasn't punishment for what you did. It was punishment for what you didn't do. You never begged me to stay. I leaned back, studying the woman who once shared my life. And would you have? I asked quietly. Stayed? She didn't answer. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. Some people never cry for forgiveness. They cry for themselves. For a long time, we sat in the noise of the coffee machine, the only sound brave enough to exist between us. Finally, I said, You wanted power, not peace. You had it. How does it feel? She closed her eyes. Empty. The word was barely there. I thought making you small would make me whole. It didn't. It just made everything quieter. She looked at me again. Michael, I can't undo it, but I can own it. I nodded slowly. Then own it by letting it end. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. This is for you, she said. It's not an apology. It's something else. I opened it. Inside was a check, $38,000. The cost of the wedding, she said. You shouldn't have paid for your own humiliation. I stared at it, then tore it neatly down the middle. Money can't buy back dignity, I said, and mine's already paid in full. Her face softened, maybe for the first time in years. She stood to leave. At the door, she turned. You're not angry? I shook my head. I was, but anger's a debt that collects interest. I've gone bankrupt enough times to know better. She smiled sadly. You always were better at surviving. I watched her walk to the car, red coat bright against the gray sky, a small piece of yesterday moving farther away. When she drove off, I went back inside. The house felt lighter. I looked at the medal, the photo, and the torn check on the table. 3 stories. 1 lesson. Love gives, pride takes, dignity stays. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking apart. A strip of sunlight slid across the window pane like forgiveness trying to find its way in. I stood there, breathing it in. Then my phone buzzed again, my daughter's name this time. 1 message. Dad, we need to talk. It's about Mom. Something happened after she left. I stared at the words, a chill running through the calm. The sunlight dimmed as a new shadow crossed the yard. Some storms end. Others just change their name. The message came at dusk. My daughter's text still glowed on the screen. Something happened to Mom. I read it twice, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something less final. They didn't. I called immediately, but she didn't answer. So I drove. The highway stretched out under a dying sky, the kind of blue that looks bruised. Every mile felt heavier. By the time I reached her neighborhood, the air had that stillness that comes before a siren. And then I heard it distant, but close enough to know. I turned the corner and saw the lights. 2 police cars, 1 ambulance, her red coat on the ground near the driveway. I parked, crooked, got out before the engine stopped. My daughter was there, standing beside an officer, her hands pressed against her face. She saw me and ran forward. Dad, she's alive, she said, voice shaking. She fainted at the wheel. Hit the mailbox. They think it's her heart. I nodded, exhaling what I hadn't realized I was holding. Where are they taking her? County Hospital, she said. They just left. I put my arm around her, steady but brief. Go home, I told her softly. I'll meet you there later. At the hospital, the hallways smelled like antiseptic and fear. The nurse recognized me from years back. She's stable, she said. Lucky she stopped where she did. I thanked her, then walked to the window of room 214. My ex-wife lay still under the pale sheets, oxygen tube tracing the side of her face. For the first time in years, she looked peaceful. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Machines whispered around us, steady and calm. I watched the rhythm of her breathing, the rise and fall of someone who'd fought too long with herself. Her hand moved slightly, her eyes opened. Michael, she murmured. You came. Of course I did, I said quietly. You're the mother of my daughter. That's enough. She tried to smile, but it hurt her. You shouldn't care anymore. Care isn't a choice, I said. It's muscle memory. Her eyes softened, then drifted toward the window. Rain had started again, faint and slow. "I thought dying would feel different," she whispered. "You're not dying," I said. "You're resting." She closed her eyes again. "I was wrong about everything." I didn't answer. Sometimes the best response to confession is silence. After a while, the nurse came in, adjusting wires and smiles. "She'll need rest," she said. I nodded, stood up, and placed the folded letter she'd written me on the bedside table. "For when she wakes up," I told the nurse. Outside, the rain had turned steady. I walked to my car, sat for a moment without starting it. Through the windshield, I could see the reflection of the hospital sign glowing red against the wet pavement. It reminded me of the metal's glitter, faded but still alive. I turned the key and started driving home. The night was darker than usual, but my chest felt lighter. I thought about what she had said about being wrong, about fear, about survival. Maybe this was how dignity heals. Not with revenge, but with release. Halfway home, my phone rang again. My daughter's voice came through, trembling but calmer. "Dad," she said, "thank you for going. She asked for you before she fainted." I smiled faintly, eyes on the empty road. "That's enough for me," I said. There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Do you think she'll change?" I looked out at the rain streaking the glass. "People don't change, sweetheart," I said. "But sometimes they remember who they were before pride took their place." The call ended, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: peace that didn't need proof. But peace never lasts long. When I got home, the answering machine was blinking again. One new message. I pressed play. A man's voice this time. Shaky, nervous. "Mr. Turner, this is Officer Lane. We found something in your ex-wife's car while processing the crash. It's addressed to you. You'll want to read it." The line clicked dead. I stood there, staring at the machine as the rain hammered the roof harder. Whatever she hadn't said in the hospital, she'd written somewhere else, and it was waiting for me. The envelope came the next morning, hand-delivered by a young officer who couldn't look me in the eye. He said they'd found it in the glove compartment, sealed and labeled with my name in her handwriting. The same sharp cursive I had known all my life. He handed it over, nodded once, and left without another word. I stood in the doorway for a long minute before opening it. Inside was one page. No greeting, no date. Just her truth written plain. "I never learned how to love someone without controlling them. You gave me too much peace, and I mistook it for distance. I made you small, because I was afraid you'd stop needing me." The words bled at the edges where rain had seeped in. I read them twice, then once more out loud. They sounded softer when spoken, like a confession she never could have said face to face. At the bottom, she had written something else. "Tell our daughter I know now what I taught her wrong. Love isn't power, it's presence." That line sat in my chest like a stone I didn't know I'd been carrying. I folded the page carefully and slipped it into my wallet beside the metal. One born of a child's purity, one born of a woman's regret, both heavy in different ways. I called my daughter and told her what the letter said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you forgive her?" I thought about it. About 30 years of promises, pride, and silence. "Forgiveness isn't something you give," I said. "It's something you stop holding back." She didn't speak again, but I could hear her crying softly on the other end. That night, I drove to the edge of town, to the old pier where my ex-wife used to take our daughter to feed the ducks. The wind was sharp, the lake still. I took the letter out and read it one last time under the dull yellow pier light. Then I set it down on the bench and let the wind take it. Paper flutters, quieter than guilt. It rose, spun once, and vanished into the dark water. I sat there until the sky began to lighten. For the first time since the wedding, I felt no anger. No sadness, just space. A kind of calm that didn't ask for understanding. Before leaving, I looked at the empty bench and whispered, "You're free now, so am I." Driving home, the morning radio played an old country song about second chances. I smiled. Some truths don't need an answer, they just need a place to rest. But as I pulled into my driveway, another car was waiting. My daughter's. She stepped out before I even parked. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Dad," she said. Mom woke up. I froze. "And?" Her eyes filled with something between fear and disbelief. "She wants to see you. She says there's one more thing she has to tell you about me." The air went still. My heartbeat didn't. Some stories end with forgiveness. Others start again with a secret. I drove straight to the hospital. The sky was clear but cold. The kind of morning that hides its truth behind sunlight. My daughter rode with me. silent the whole way, fingers twisted in her lap. I could tell she knew more than she wanted to say. When we arrived, the nurse led us down a narrow hall that smelled of bleach and quiet fear. My ex-wife was sitting up in bed, pale but awake. The oxygen tube was gone. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the storm inside her had finally spent itself. When she saw me, her eyes filled. "Michael," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "You said there's something I need to hear." She hesitated, looked toward our daughter, then back at me. "Yes," she said softly. "Something I've kept for 25 years. My chest tightened, but I waited. She reached for a small envelope on the table beside her. "It's about her," she said, nodding toward our daughter. My daughter's voice cracked. "Mom, please don't." But her mother kept going. "She deserves to know, and so do you." Her hands trembled as she passed the envelope to me. Inside was a photograph, an old one, taken in a hospital room. My daughter, newborn, wrapped in a blanket. And beside her, another man, the same man she later married. My breath left me. She closed her eyes. "He was there before you came home from deployment," she said. I told myself it was just loneliness. But then I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't sure whose child she was. I prayed it was yours, and I let you believe it. You loved her so deeply, I couldn't break that. The room spun. My daughter covered her mouth, tears running freely now. "You're lying," she whispered, voice trembling. Her mother shook her head. "I wish I were." I looked at the photo again, at the face of a younger version of a man I used to call friend, every second stretched thin. The monitors hummed steadily, indifferent to the chaos inside us. I stood up slowly. "Why now?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Because truth can't die with me, and because I saw you that night at the wedding, the way you still loved her. I knew you had already earned the title of father, no matter what blood says." My daughter sobbed, shaking her head. "Dad, I don't care. You're my father. You always will be." I wanted to speak, but no words came. Only warmth, only grief. I reached for her hand, and she clung to mine like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her mother's voice grew weaker. "I never deserved either of you," she said, "but I wanted you to know before it was too late." Then she turned her head to the window, where the light spilled through the blinds like mercy, trying to find a way in. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and closed her eyes. The monitors kept their rhythm steady, like forgiveness refusing to stop. I stood there, holding my daughter's hand, both of us suspended in the kind of silence that has no language. Later, outside the hospital, she looked up at me through tears. "Does this change anything?" I took a long breath. "No," I said. "Blood builds a body. Love builds a life. And you're mine by every measure that matters." She fell into my arms, shaking, and I held her until the wind softened. But as we walked to the car, I saw the envelope still in my hand, the photograph inside faintly visible through the paper. And something in me knew this truth, like all truths, wasn't finished. Because some secrets don't end when they're spoken. They echo. That night, sleep didn't come. The photograph lay on my desk, half under the lamplight, like it was daring me to look again. I didn't. I just sat there, listening to the clock tick past midnight. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like judgment. Every sound, wind, creak, heartbeat seemed to ask the same question. What now? I had faced death, war, betrayal. But this was different. This was the kind of wound that doesn't bleed, it just changes the shape of everything you thought you knew. Around 2 a.m, my daughter called. Her voice was soft, fragile. "I can't sleep," she said. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that photo." I told her, "Then stop looking at it. Look at what's real instead." She was quiet for a few seconds. "You mean you?" "Yes," I said. "Me." We didn't say much after that. She just breathed on the other end, and I listened. There are moments when love doesn't need to speak, it just needs to stay. By morning, I drove to the lake again. The same one where I'd let her mother's letter drift away. The air was heavy with fog. I stood at the water's edge, the photograph in my pocket, and thought about what forgiveness really costs. If I burned it, maybe the pain would vanish. If I kept it, maybe it would own me. So I did neither. I tore it in half. Not out of anger, but out of mercy for her. For me, for the man in the picture who would never understand what he lost. The pieces fluttered into the water and sank without a sound. When I got home, my daughter was waiting on the porch. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Did you read the rest of Mom's journal?" she asked. "The nurse gave it to me this morning." I frowned. What journal? She handed me a small leather notebook worn at the edges, pages filled with cramped handwriting. I opened it carefully. The first line read, "If I die, tell Michael he was the only man who ever stayed when I deserved to be left." I kept reading letters to no one, regrets in fragments. She had written about fear, about guilt, about nights she stood by my old uniform just to remember what loyalty looked like. Halfway through, a line stopped me cold. The test came back. She's his. I read it again. Then again. My daughter stared at me, confusion spreading. "Dad, what does it mean?" I exhaled slowly. "It means the truth was crueler than the lie. You were mine, all along." She broke into tears. Relief, disbelief, everything at once. I pulled her close and held her like I had the day she learned to walk. "She punished herself," I said quietly. Her silence was her sentence. We sat there on the porch, the wind brushing through the trees like it was carrying her final confession away. The sky was gray, the kind of color that holds both rain and light. My daughter looked up. "So it's over?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, truth doesn't end things. It starts them over." She leaned against my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that accepts. But just as the calm settled, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown number," I answered. A man's voice, low and careful. "Mr. Turner," he said. "This is the attorney handling your ex-wife's estate. There's something in her will address to you and your daughter. She left it in a safety deposit box." I glanced at my daughter. "What is it?" The man paused. "She called it her last redemption." The line went quiet. I looked out at the horizon, where the fog was lifting. Every secret ends, I thought, but not without leaving one more door half open. We met the attorney 2 days later at a quiet office downtown. The kind of place where the blinds stay half closed and everything smells faintly of paper and coffee that's gone cold. My daughter sat beside me, hands folded. The same nervous habit her mother used to have. The attorney, a man in his 50s with silver glasses, slid a small black box across the desk. "This," he said, "was placed in our care 6 months ago." She called it her final act of clarity. He unlocked it with a key that looked older than the office itself. Inside, there was no jewelry, no money, just a flash drive and a folded letter. My daughter's eyes flicked to mine. "Play it," she said. The screen on the attorney's laptop came alive. Her face appeared, my ex-wife, recorded weeks before the wedding. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes raw but steady. She spoke slowly, like every word was being weighed before release. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. This isn't an apology. It's an explanation." She looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. "I thought love was control. I thought being right was safer than being kind. And I thought the only way to survive was to make others smaller. But, Michael, you were the one who taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's grace. I didn't understand it until it was too late." My daughter wiped her eyes, whispering, "She made this before the wedding?" I nodded. On screen, her mother took a breath. "To our daughter," she continued, "you were born of my fear and his hope. You carry both. But please, don't inherit my pride. You are your father's child in all the ways that matter. And one day, you'll understand why he never shouted, why he never fought back. Because love without ego doesn't need an audience." The video ended with her whispering, almost to herself, "Tell him thank you for teaching me how to lose with dignity." The screen went black. The only sound was the faint hum of the laptop. My daughter leaned forward, hands over her face, shoulders shaking. I closed the laptop gently. The attorney cleared his throat, then handed me the letter. "She asked that this one be read only by you." When he left the room, I unfolded it. Her handwriting was shakier now. "Michael, I've written you too many letters and said too few truths. If there's a heaven, it's not for the perfect, it's for those who finally see themselves clearly. You were my mirror, and I kept breaking it because I couldn't face what it showed. Thank you for never throwing the pieces back at me." I folded it carefully, slid it into my jacket pocket, and turned to my daughter. "Let's go home," I said. She nodded, eyes red but calm. Outside, the air was cool and bright, the kind of afternoon that feels like forgiveness. We walked in silence to the car. Halfway there, my daughter said, "She finally said it." I looked at her. "Said what?" "Thank you." I smiled faintly. Some words take a lifetime to earn. We drove home with the windows down. The wind felt good. On the radio, a preacher's voice said something about redemption, not erasing the past, but giving it new meaning. I turned the volume up just enough to hear it, then let it fade into the sound of the road. When we got home, I placed the letter beside the medal and the torn photograph. 3 lifetimes of truth, side by side. My daughter stood behind me, quiet for a while. Then she said, "You're free now, aren't you?" I turned and smiled. "Not free," I said softly. "Just done being haunted." She nodded and hugged me. It was the kind of hug that doesn't ask for forgiveness. It just says, "I understand." But even peace has echoes. Later that night, as I turned off the lights, I noticed the metal glitter faintly under the lamp. For the first time, it didn't look like memory. It looked like closure. Then my phone vibrated on the table. A new message. From an unknown number. "Mr. Turner, this is Kyle the photographer. There's something else you should see from that wedding night." A part of the recording that was never sent. The screen dimmed. My chest tightened. Because sometimes redemption isn't the end, it's the door to one last truth waiting in the dark. The video arrived just after midnight. A link from the photographer, labeled simply, Untitled, Clip 2, MP4. I hesitated before opening it. My daughter was asleep in the next room, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sigh of the wind. I clicked play. The screen showed the reception hall again, the same night, the same laughter, the same glow. But this angle was new, taken from a stationary camera near the back. It captured the crowd, the stage, the moments before the host called my name. Then, faintly, her voice, my ex-wife speaking to the planner. "He's sitting in the back? Good. He'll see what he lost." My stomach tightened. But the video didn't stop there. A few seconds later, the host leaned toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear. She frowned, then nodded. The clip zoomed slightly, and I realized the host had changed the script. He wasn't supposed to call me on stage. She looked panicked, like the plan had slipped from her hands. Then, quietly, she turned to the planner again. "Maybe it's better this way," she said. "He deserves to be seen at least once." I froze the frame, her face conflicted, small, human. For the first time, I saw something behind the pride. Regret, maybe love, buried under too many years of pretending it didn't exist. I replayed it again and again, searching her expression like it might give me a new ending. It didn't, but it gave me something else understanding. The next morning, I showed the video to my daughter. She watched it in silence, tears tracing her cheeks without sound. When it ended, she whispered, "She was trying to make it right, wasn't she?" I nodded, in her own broken way. She smiled faintly through tears. Guess we all do. Later, I walked to the old park near my house. The benches were slick with dew, the air thick with the scent of pine and memory. I sat there, thinking about all the ways we hurt each other without meaning to. We destroy, rebuild, repeat until one day, there's nothing left to protect but the truth. I took my phone out, replayed the clip one last time, then deleted it. Some things don't need to live forever. Some peace only exists when you stop replaying what could have been. When I got home, my daughter was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," I said. She smiled. "Couldn't sleep. I was thinking maybe we should visit her grave. Together." I nodded. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's time." That afternoon, we drove to the cemetery on the hill. The wind carried the faint smell of rain. Her name was already carved clean into the marble, the dates neat and final. My daughter placed white lilies at the base, the same flowers her mother had loved. I stood beside her, hands in my pockets, watching the clouds drift slow across the sky. "She made mistakes," my daughter said quietly, "but she was still my mom, and she was still someone I once loved," I added. "That counts for something." We stood there for a long while, not praying, just remembering. When we finally turned to leave, my daughter slipped her arm through mine. "You know," she said, "Mom was wrong about one thing." I looked at her. "What's that?" She thought silence made you weak, but it made you unforgettable. I smiled. The kind that starts small but lasts. "Maybe that's what dignity really is," I said. "Not pride, not anger, just quiet that doesn't break." We walked back toward the car, the wind at our backs. The storm clouds were thinning, and for the first time, the light felt gentle. But as we reached the gate, my phone buzzed again another message. This one from the attorney. "Mr. Turner, I'm sorry to disturb you, but the bank just called. There's one final envelope under your name marked for release today." I looked at my daughter. She sighed, half smiling. One more? I nodded slowly. One more. Because even after the last goodbye, life always finds a way to whisper one more truth before it lets you go. The envelope was small, worn at the edges, the paper faintly yellow, like it had been waiting longer than it should. My daughter and I opened it together in the attorney's office. No seal this time, just a folded letter and a key. The attorney said softly, "She left this one for both of you. No instructions, just those words." Then he left us, alone. I unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was slow, fragile. If you're reading this, it means I finally ran out of ways to fix the past. So I left one thing. I can give you the truth that started it all. Beneath the letterhead was an address, not a house, a storage unit. We drove there that afternoon. The place was quiet, rows of gray metal doors humming softly under the wind. The key fit the lock perfectly. Inside, dust and time shared the air. There was only one box, taped neatly, with my name written across it. I opened it slowly. Inside were photos, hundreds of them birthdays, trips, holidays, all the years I thought she'd erased. And at the bottom, a notebook. I opened it to the first page. Her handwriting again. These are the days I was proud of us, but too stubborn to admit it. Page after page, memories she had hidden, moments she'd cherished in silence. A note beside one picture read, "He taught her how to ride a bike while I watched from the kitchen." I didn't join them because I was jealous of how easily she laughed with him. Another. He came home late from work. Still brought her a cupcake. She said, "Daddy never forgets." I wish I hadn't pretended not to hear. My daughter leaned over my shoulder, tears glinting. "She kept all of this," she whispered. I nodded. Even the parts she couldn't face. We sat on the cold concrete floor, flipping through pieces of a life too human to hate. Somewhere between the pages, I stopped feeling betrayed. I just felt tired and free. At the end of the notebook was one last line. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell him he was right. Dignity outlives pride." I closed the book and placed it back in the box. "That's it," I said quietly. My daughter wiped her face. "No," she said. "That's everything." We carried the box outside. The sun was setting, painting gold over the cracked pavement. She looked at me and smiled through tears. "You know, I think she finally learned what love meant." I nodded. She did. She just learned too late to say it out loud. At home that night, I placed the notebook on the shelf beside the medal, the photo, and her final letter. 4 relics of one story, each heavier, each softer. My daughter poured tea and sat across from me. "You're going to miss her, aren't you?" she asked. I smiled faintly. You don't stop missing people who teach you what not to forget. We sat there for a while, letting silence settle like dust after a long war. No anger, no ghosts, just understanding. Then she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "You know, Dad, you never really sat in the back row. You were always holding everything up from behind." I laughed, quiet and real. "Maybe that's all fatherhood is," I said, "loving from the seats no one notices." The clock ticked softly. Outside, the night was calm. Before turning off the lights, I looked once more at that medal, its glitter barely catching the lamp's glow. And I realized something simple, something final. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand a front row seat. It just waits steady, silent, and unbreakable. If you've listened this far, type 1 in the comments, so I know you stayed till the end. Be kind to yourselves. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it heals too.